Thanks for being here. Subscribe to Cheating Stories Best, so you don't miss new stories.
You are listening to the continuation of the story. You can listen to the previous part via the link in the description below this video. Happy listening. The plan was not entirely clear to me. I thought Rebecca needed to find out as much as she could while whatever we were facing tried to take control of her, but this did not happen. Rebecca was clearly influenced by the voice that spoke to us all. I tried desperately not to give in to its offer. It felt like my mind was working in slow motion. The effort to say no took all my strength, and I didn't even have to say it out loud. It was enough to just think no. On the other hand, if I even thought for a moment yes, or maybe, everything that made me who I am would be lost forever. Sarah, I love you, it sounded right in my head. I knew it was Chris, although I couldn't explain how I knew it. Chris had no supernatural abilities other than his fighting skills. He was out of his element here, but he had just saved me. Suddenly, anger flared in my brain. Hell no, get out of my head. I thought with all my might. I focused my thoughts on Chris and Char, thinking about how he would probably throw a wild celebration for her first birthday in 6 months. I told him that she wouldn't remember anything, but he kept talking about photos and videos, so I knew I hadn't convinced him. There is no way I will allow this entity to take me away from them. Then another voice sounded in my head. I did it. Aunt Angela said it suddenly. My eyes opened again, and I saw Rebecca almost reaching the door. Chris, using his amazing speed, crossed the room in an instant and positioned himself between her and the door. Chris gently slapped her cheek, and her eyes began to focus. As soon as Rebecca came to her senses, there was some kind of explosion. It was like a bright light flashed in my brain. Get out of my head! It was Rebecca, and she radiated so much raw psychic energy that I was surprised Chris didn't feel it. Then, another explosion occurred. This one was physical. Everything happened much faster than I had ever seen, as if a strange implosion had occurred. All the windows in the room shattered inward, throwing shards of razor-sharp glass in our direction. Angela grabbed Rebecca's shoulder. Somehow, my aunt was able to tap into Rebecca's abilities and redirect each sharp, deadly shard toward one of the walls. When I looked at the wall, I really saw it. I saw what we were fighting. It was a woman. She wasn't exactly beautiful, but not ugly either. She was dressed like one of those early settlers, wearing a long, layered dress and a formal hairstyle at the time. I suppose, in the manner of her era, she could be considered attractive. Her face, on the other hand, was both angry and smiling. She smiled like a wolf playing with its prey, and then she threw back her head and laughed. Well, that was fun, she said, still giggling. Looks like I want to be able to do this the easy way. I looked around, and everyone in the room, including Chris, clearly saw the woman. She was not made of flesh. It was almost like fog, but completely distinct. You little witch, she said, pointing at Rebecca. You have a choice to make. If you ever want to see your companion again, you will meet me on the night of the solstice. You can even bring your friends if you want. They clearly pose no threat to me, and they seem to give you courage. Besides, when we're done with you, they'll love to watch you kill them. Nobody said a word. We just looked at her shocked. Maybe you'll keep this one to serve me, she spat, pointing at Chris. But for now, you all seem stunned. Let me do something to light the fire in you. As her misty form disappeared, small lights lit up throughout the office. At the same time, all the lights throughout the building went out. What was even stranger was that the electronic locks on all the doors slammed shut. I tried to swipe my card, but there was no electricity. Yai began to panic. She's trying to burn us alive, she said. Savannah calmly walked to one of the broken windows and looked out. Smoke began to fill the room. This shouldn't have happened either. The wind from the broken windows should have dispersed the smoke, but the wind did not seem to penetrate the building. It'll take the fire, said my Aunt Angela. She grabbed Rebecca's hand again and closed her eyes. The cool rain extinguished the fire. It'll open the door, Chris said. My husband was a real bore sometimes. He grabbed my shoulder the same way Angela grabbed Rebecca. He then jumped into the air while performing a side kick. His outstretched leg struck the door, knocking it open and freeing us. It wasn't magic that got us out of here, Evie spat. It's magic, Savannah said to me. We walked out of the building, and as I looked at my office from the outside, I was glad we had good insurance. It was strange that no one outside the office had heard anything. I headed to the gatehouse and told the building security chief to call the insurance company and get an agent to assess the damage to my office. I needed new floors, some paint, and new furniture, but things could have been much worse. When I returned to the parking lot, I noticed that everyone looked like they'd been through a war. Everyone looked depressed and exhausted. Savannah was silent as usual, and even Evie didn't say a word. Aunt Angela was still smiling, trying to support Rebecca. Chris was gathering everyone into my SUV. There are 6 of us, so we can all fit. Then I noticed Chris heading to his car. I should have known that even in this situation, Chris wouldn't be able to leave his Mustang. Evie, I shouted, you're a truck driver? Or rather, your husband drives my truck. Just follow us. Well, for goodness sake, Sarah, she chuckled. Let the man breathe. But within seconds, Evie climbed into the driver's seat and followed us out of the parking lot. I leaned back into the GT 500S thick leather upholstery and closed my eyes. I was completely exhausted. I reached out for my husband's hand and thanked my luck that he was there. Chris, I mumbled, as exhaustion took over and I fell asleep. I love you too, Sarah, he said. I woke up in the dark. My hands were tied behind my back, and everything hurt. I remembered this man, this creature, that hit me in the face several times. I had never been hit so hard in my life, although I'd been through many fights. What irritated me most was how easily he dealt with me. At first, he started following me. I noticed he was following me earlier. He didn't even try to hide. I stopped as I left the factory. I needed to call Sarah and find out how her surveillance of my unfaithful wife went. I decided that if I just stopped, this guy would pass by, so I made the call. This man had the nerve to just come up and push me while I was talking. Then he pushed me again. I'll call you back, I told Sarah. I charged at the guy. Well, let's be honest, I'm only 1.75 meters tall, but I weigh 95 kilograms, most of it muscle, although there's some wiry fat too. But this guy, he was old. He must have been 50 or 60 years old. He was my height, but I clearly outweighed him by 50 pounds. So when I hit him in the jaw, I expected him to pass out. But his head barely moved. He didn't do any karate moves or anything like that. He just stood there and smiled. Are you finished? He asked. I didn't answer. I was too shocked that my punch didn't hurt him. The next thing I remember is waking up, all thoughts racing feverishly through my head. The guy looked like some old. Maybe he was one of the people my wife slept with. Maybe she found out what was going on and sent him after me to make sure I didn't file for divorce. Obviously, she didn't understand how hard it was for me. I loved her more than I could express in words. I didn't want to offend her. I wanted to give her the freedom to date all the old alcoholic men she wanted. I just didn't want to be married to her while she was doing this. Even now, tied up in some dark pit, I still loved her. It will take me a long time, if ever, to forget her. Somewhere in the darkness, I heard a faint groan. Who's there? I asked. I heard a faint sound again. It seemed that every breath was given to this person with pain. I heard several short, sharp breaths, but there was no answer to my question. My name is Joey Logano, I said. My hands are tied. I am here against my will. Are you a prisoner too? I am Sister Piatti, came the answer. Then I heard her take another clearly painful breath. Did you say sister? What do you mean? You're a nun? I asked. Yes, she said, sighing again. But I'm not the nun you're used to. So you're one of those modern nuns who wears suits, writes books, and appears on television. Huh? I asked. She laughed, although I realized that the laughter hurt her. Her mood improved noticeably. I'm rather the opposite, she laughed. I do wear a suit, but it's not the kind of suit you imagine. Nuns don't wear it, and they don't write books about us. We certainly don't appear on television. Even as she spoke, her pride in her work shone through, and her voice became stronger. Don't worry, sister. Before I was kidnapped, I managed to send a message to one of my friends. She's the best private detective. She'll find us, I said. Joey, as soon as my sisters can, they'll come for me. I think they'll find us before your detective does. We're professionals at this. We have a whole support team. In fact, I'm surprised none of us has been saved yet, she said. We sat and talked, drawing strength from each other. Our conversation became a defense against fear and darkness. However, all the while, I felt that she was hiding something from me. Later, I was glad she didn't tell me everything. I wasn't at all prepared to learn such things. Mason, as soon as the sun began to set, I got up and walked. The last rays of the sun were very unpleasant, but I had no choice. I put on dark glasses, generously applied sunscreen, and donned a dark hood before heading to the apartment where Patience and Repentance were waiting for me. Patience was already on her feet, though she stood unsteadily. She looked alarmed to see me. She quickly grabbed me and pulled me into the room. Even Repentance was surprised to see my exposed skin, smoking, and turning black. Mason, you're a fool. Death won't bring us closer to it any faster, she said. I can't just lie there while she... I understand, I started. We feel the same way, Patience said, but we need to get to her in one piece. And when we get there, we'll have to come up with a plan, Repentance added. And we'll have to do something terrible, said Patience. Repentance looked at her and lowered her head. What? I asked. There's nothing I won't do for her. I'm willing to die for her, I said. Even Repentance was touched by my words. It's a pity it's not so simple, Mason said. Patience. It's easy to take this on because it's what we do. It's harder to convince another person to go along with it. It's especially difficult if that person is a friend. She's already done her part and left this business. She has a home and a family. She has a child. She doesn't need this life anymore. You're talking about that Prudence the stupid who kidnapped Patty was talking about, right? I asked. They both nodded. We'll figure it out along the way, I said, feeling disgusted. We went to the airport and soon used my friend's plane again. We had all night to fly to Chicago. I knew it wouldn't take that long, but I needed to find a place to hide for the day in a city I'd only seen a couple of times. I didn't have any shelters in Chicago, and I needed to make sure I didn't die in daylight. I trusted patience, and to a lesser extent repentance, but I never took my safety for granted. After all, they worked for the church. Sarah, I woke up in the dark. I was lying on a comfortable sofa with a warm blanket thrown over me. Despite the darkness, I felt Chris's presence nearby. My eyes opened, and I saw his silhouette against the background of the window, looking out. I miss her, he said. Somehow, even in the darkness, Chris sensed the moment when I opened my eyes. I know, honey. Me too, I said. Everyone is asleep. That battle, or whatever it was, left you all exhausted. Both bedrooms upstairs are occupied. Aunt Angela and Rebecca are in one. Evie and Savannah are in the other. Evie is amazing. She drove the car all the way here like a pro. She kept driving even after that. Like everyone else, she fell asleep as soon as we arrived. I had to carry her upstairs. She talks a lot, but her heart is in the right place. Where are we? I asked. I somehow slept through your entire escape plan. We're at Will Temple's cabin. Remember when we hid here during that weird thing with the clones? He said. I can't believe we thought it was a weird thing at the time, I said. He sighed, and I could imagine him shrugging. So let me get this straight, I joked. There are 2 huge beds upstairs, and it looks like the love of your life hasn't earned a place in either of them. So, someone must have been watching you, lady, while you were sleeping, he said. Well, that explains you. But what about me? I asked. I didn't want you to be away from me, he said softly. Then he turned sharply toward the stairs, as if he had heard something. God, this is so scary, my Aunt Angela smiled. How the hell did he know I was here? Come on, Chris, she said. Tell my niece you love her for the 200th time today. She loves hearing it. And then when you told her that, it got her out of that mess we were in. I love you, Sarah, he said, and as always, it made me feel like I might explode with happiness. We will survive all this strangeness. We've always survived, and one day, we'll have incredible stories to tell our grandchildren. Angela gave us a few minutes, and then gathered the others. Her name is Bridget Bishop, Angela said. I Googled her. She was one of the first people to die in the Salem witch trials. She's very angry and wants revenge. How the hell do we fit in here? Evie asked. Something is driving her, Angela said. She believes that by taking the power of 100 witches, she will become so powerful that she can gain a new body and take revenge on both the souls and descendants of the people who hanged her. Can I repeat my damn question, or are you going to answer it? Evie asked. Rebecca may be the most powerful witch on the planet right now, Angela said. Bridget wants her body. Like Sarah said, these night attacks were just Bridget testing out what it would be like to take control of Rebecca's body. You can answer my question anytime. Aunt Angela, Evie said. We're here because Bridget needs to gather the power of 100 witches, and the 3 of us were on her list. Since she couldn't get us, she got angry and now wants us too. She's like a pit bull that grabbed the bone. But I know how she stops. There is a necklace called the Amulet of Saint CLA. It is supposed to protect the wearer from any possessions. It's usually used against demons, but I think it will work against a dead witch. If we get it, not only can we prevent Rebecca's body from being taken over, but we can also trap Bridget inside it. Now that sounds like a damn plan, Evie said. Where is it? This is where Sarah and Chris come in, Angela said. After all, she's the best in her business. Is she even doing anything? Evie asked. I didn't know that running around and shouting "Where's Chris?" was considered an achievement, I said. Shut up, I shouted, then we looked at each other with a smile. Go get him, cousin, she smiled. I headed to the spare room that Will was using as an office. I started looking for information. The World Wide Web is an amazing thing. You can find information about anything on the internet. An hour later, I already knew the history of the amulet and how it was created. Then I had to trace its path through the years. Around 1 o'clock in the morning, I heard whispers outside the door. She's been there for several hours, a woman's voice said. Just let her work, Chris whispered. He quietly entered the room, left a cup of hot cocoa on the table next to me, and kissed me. 2 hours later, I left the room with a smile on my face. For the last 30 years, the amulet had been in the possession of a witch named Marvel Sardos. She lived in New Orleans. She became rich as a fortune teller and owned a chain of fortune-telling salons. Everyone thought it was just nonsense. Nobody knew she was a real witch. She sold the amulet to a woman named A. Duets last year on Halloween. Chris, honey, you and I are heading to New Orleans. We're gonna ask the witch where this amulet is now, right? He asked. No, honey, I said. Duets and her husband Wayne Duets live in the Chicago suburbs. It's only about an hour away from us. Then why are we going to New Orleans? Evie asked. Because after they used the amulet, they gave it back to Margot. I said, we need to hurry to get back as soon as possible. Angela can protect you until we return, but we need to get the amulet to protect Rebecca until that witch comes back even stronger. We barely fought her off tonight. If she finds any more witches, she will become stronger. This is the end for us. Less than 10 minutes later, Chris and I were on our way to the airport. We were trying to get on a flight to New Orleans that was leaving around 9 in the morning. With all the new security procedures, we needed to get there quickly. Along the way, Chris had a good idea. He reminded me of those small private charter planes that fly on schedule when they're available. We might be able to find one cheaper than flying on a commercial plane at the last minute. I opened my laptop and found a man who was flying from New Orleans to Chicago. If we're lucky, we'll be able to fly back with him, I said. When we got to the airport, this man had already landed and was refueling his plane for the return flight. We thought he would want to rest for a few hours, but he was refueling his plane. We had to wait until his passengers got off before we could talk to him about the ride back. His passengers were strange. One of them, a man, looked like a typical hardened Cajun. He was about 28, with 3 days of stubble adorning his face. He seemed very pale and incredibly tense. There was nothing special about this man. Perhaps it was my many years of investigative instincts, but I felt something strange about him. Despite his appearance, the two women who were with him, on the contrary, seriously scared me. Both were dressed from head to toe in black leather, and it was clear that these clothes had seen better days. One of them was older, with a learned look. She was beautiful and could have been any age from 40 to 60. The other was the largest woman I had ever seen in my life. She looked like an Amazon come to life, and twice as fierce. And, of course, she was red-haired. I was glad that we didn't take any of the others with us. The giant, red-haired woman looked us over, and I swore something flashed between us. Then she quickly turned away and began to talk to her two strange companions. I would really like to investigate and learn more about them if I had more time. I swear, in the 2 minutes we were with them, I heard her mention killing something or someone at least 20 times. One of those times, I think she was talking about us. Mason, traveling with Patience and Penance, was an experience. Patience, other than her clothing, didn't attract any attention or cause any problems. Penance, on the contrary, was a real thorn. I became more and more convinced that Penance was the element itself. Her suspicion of everything and dark personality forced us to constantly stop her from staring or confronting those around her. Added to this was the fact that despite her size, Penance was beautiful, and this created problems. Men stared at her, and some women too. When she caught their gaze, she immediately suspected that they were plotting something against us. Other times, she thought they were working for the vampire we were running from, but also searching for this. This led to Penance whispering that she was going to kill everyone who passed by. Penance suspected everyone. Men, women, children, and even pets were all on her list. I had to pull her away from a deaf woman whose guide dog briefly met her gaze. This led to her lecture that if I ever touched her again, she would find a way to resurrect me so she could kill me again. As we left the airport, she stared at a couple. She swore there was something off about them. The man was thin and blonde. He looked like a slightly aged surfer. Perhaps he should have shaved, but the same could be said about me. When I looked at him more closely, I realized that there really was something unusual about him. He looked at us as if he was wondering how he would deal with us if necessary. Dude, you have no idea, I chuckled. The woman next to him was amazing. She had long, light red hair that almost had a life of its own. She was tall and slender with interesting curves. Her little square glasses on her nose made her look like the prettiest librarian in the world. She also carefully observed everything around her. If we had more time, it would be interesting to know what they did, but time was not on our side for several reasons. First, I needed to find a meeting place with that vampire. Secondly, I needed to convince an old friend of Patience and Penance to help us save Pity, although we all felt guilty that we were going to drag her back into this story. So, we left the airport without making contact with anyone. I used my phone to find 2 hotels near the airport, rented a car, and dropped the women off at one hotel without telling them where I was staying. Before leaving, Patience said that they would get some sleep, then check out the meeting place and contact their old friend. We would visit her the next evening. When I woke up, I checked into a hotel that was less touristy and more secluded. Shortly after sunrise, I put up the Do Not Disturb sign and pulled the curtains as tightly as possible. Then I took out my suitcase and pulled out a long plastic bag, which was lined inside with a dark material that didn't allow light to pass through. I placed the bag under the bed and zipped it shut, trapping myself inside. It was a risky place to sleep, but I was willing to take any risk for pity. The next evening, I woke up. It wouldn't have surprised me if I hadn't woken up at all, but since I did, I had things to do. I called Patience and said I would be at their hotel in 20 minutes. They hadn't sat idle. They had already visited the site of a battle with another vampire that had taken place 2 years ago. They also contacted their base and reported everything that happened. Obviously, the superiors wanted to get them out of there and send someone else. They constantly talked about some mysterious she, and perhaps even him. When I pressed for information about who this she was, they were evasive and categorically refused to discuss him. So, even though their superiors thought it was better for them to stay put until help arrived, and time was running out, we were left to our own devices. Patience knew the address of their ex-girlfriend, but decided not to contact her. Mason, you have to understand, she said. We love Pity, but we love Prudence just as much. It doesn't seem smart to risk losing both of them. Prudence has earned the right to a good life. And in the end, the church wasn't fair to her. When they thought she was infected, they just turned away from her and found a replacement. So we start working with Pity, I said. We'll figure it out. We'll save her. Or we'll die trying. Penance interjected. We just have to be smart and analyze all the possibilities. We have to outwit this vampire and kill everyone who gets in our way. This vampire is obviously very old and very smart, I said. He probably honed his strategies and battle plans over hundreds of years. And you're just a master at bringing pessimism, Penance grumbled. Let's look around the place where this meeting is going to take place, I said. Perhaps we can use the area against him, or perhaps he has someone watching the area to see when we show up. We drove there, and surprisingly, it was not a deserted open space like the one where we had encountered the other vampire a few months ago. It was a place filled with bars and restaurants. Their battles took place in the alley behind the bar, so with the noise from the parties and the fun in the bars, no one paid attention to the sounds of battle not far away. About 50 meters away, there was a small clearing that led to a park with a wooded area and a small hill. I'd prefer our next battle to take place there rather than in the alley. Looking around the area, I felt something was wrong. I spotted them in the dark behind a row of bars, two who shouldn't have been together. One of them was clearly a vampire. He was strong enough but still young. His companion was definitely not human. He had the same smell that I'd noticed from the werewolves in Texas. We stayed in the shadows to watch them. We had an idea. We could take Patience on a walk through the area to see how they would react. Perhaps one of them would follow her, or maybe they'd come back to say we'd already arrived. We were on the verge of putting our plan into action when they appeared out of nowhere. Obviously, Papa Chalu was not only inspecting the area, but was also ready for our appearance. Suddenly, 3 more werewolves and 1 older vampire appeared behind us. They surrounded us. There were more of them, and they were stronger. One of the vampires, a bald man who looked like some kind of goth or skinhead, came right up to us. Idiots, he said. You came early and empty-handed. There's no point in continuing. You didn't follow his instructions at all. Dad doesn't like it when rules are broken. Looks like you're about to get a good beating. We might have to take another one of your nuns to show you that we're serious. We had neither equipment nor weapons. I didn't need it, of course, but we hadn't planned on fighting. This was supposed to be just reconnaissance, but everything had changed. She jumped from one of the nearby rooftops, dressed from head to toe in red leather. Her skin was different from the costumes worn by Patience and Penance, but not that much. Perhaps it was more modern, with Kevlar inserts in strategic places. Her clothes were both tighter and more flexible. She landed almost silently, taking a 3-point stance, then stood up and met the vampire's gaze. Both Patience and Penance gasped at the same time. Sister, I'm not a nun anymore, she said with a smile. When I looked at her, I was stunned. The woman literally glowed. Her long golden hair sparkled with every hit of light. She stood there with a confidence that even I didn't have. This is the one Papa wanted, the vampire remarked contemptuously. Hey guys, she grinned. You probably shouldn't reach out to me. Why not? The vampire grinned. All those phone ads say it's worth reaching out and touching someone. Besides, your friends here are beaten and scared. The werewolves can smell their fear. You'll be fighting alone. The vampire took a few steps toward her. He stared at her, trying to hypnotize her. It was a really stupid mistake. He's dead, Penance muttered, as if she had cast a curse. The vampire died with a cry of pain. Everything happened so quickly that even I could barely track it. Some kind of incendiary dart shot out of nowhere, hitting the vampire, after which he burst into flames. Prudence is never alone, Penance chuckled. The other vampires and werewolves were clearly worried. The three werewolves looked at each other and took a step back. Even Patience and Penance were impressive. 1, 2, 3, 4, Prudence said calmly, as if reading a nursery rhyme. Another dead werewolf hit the floor. Her husband, she added, finishing the rhyme. I know it's your favorite, darling, she said, but you can clean it up when we get home. That was all that was needed. Regardless of whether her statement was bravado or truth, the effect was the same. The werewolves and the vampire began to run. Once the numbers were equal, they didn't want to participate in the battle. As for me, I understood them. Vampires and werewolves can live, or at least exist, for incredibly long periods of time. Boredom and stupidity usually kill us. We just get tired of the pain of existing while everything and everyone we knew disappears. Or we make a colossally stupid mistake like getting caught in the sun. The idea of dying from violence is usually not part of our calculations. We are too strong, too cunning, and if defeated, too fast to be killed. Even when seriously injured, we can escape, heal, and plan revenge. And if this is not possible, we can simply hide and wait out our enemies. It was a shock to see how easily two wolves were destroyed by two people who didn't even have holy enhancements like patience and penance. Prudence was incredible. Even without her powers, it was clear that Pity, no matter how much I loved her, was a weak imitation of Prudence. Another thing that caught my eye was that Pity was about 70 centimeters taller than the average woman. That's tall, but Prudence was almost 6 feet tall and had the aura of a literal goddess. She was so beautiful that it was almost painful to look at her. Her husband, Jason, was another mystery. It would be easy to understand if Prudence somehow retained some of the power that was called grace in the Order of the Sisters of Fate. After all, it was believed to come from heavenly sources. But how do you explain a man who fought as well as she did? I didn't have any answers. At the same time, I was glad that we could try to enlist their help in saving Pity, but I was also worried that, unlike Patience and Penance, they might not be so lenient toward my presence. Prudence turned to us and smiled. It was amazing. Her beauty was doubled just by simply widening her lips and showing her teeth. Patience, you're bad at your job, she chuckled, pointing at Penance. Doesn't the commandment that you should not covet someone else's things apply to Penance? His constant desire to take possession of my husband's toys. Patience was silent for a moment. I cannot condemn our sister for the sins that I myself have committed, she said quietly. Jason, can I keep this bow and arrow? It's not a sin. Penance grumbled. Jason isn't a neighbor. He's like family, Prudence said, sheathing her sword, ignoring her husband's annoyed sigh that she had put it away. Her golden eyes turned to me. You must be Mason, she said with a smile. You can come to us. Pet has written to me about you several times. Please, her husband said. Your presence will help relieve some of the accumulated testosterone. I liked him immediately. If the situation weren't so serious, we could have had a nice time. But my thoughts were on Pity, not on pleasant family gatherings. Prudence, we're not here for social calls, I said quietly. They took Pity. The leader of these creatures is a very ancient and very powerful vampire. He wants revenge on you for killing one of his descendants some time ago. Pity is his trump card. We have no other choice. However, I feel uncomfortable, so I ask you for help. I will give you everything you want. I fell silent and looked at her. I know people associated with the church don't really like my kind. I continued. When this is all over and she's safe, you can kill me. Just help us save her. Everyone fell silent and stared at me. Even Penance was speechless. Jason coughed, then burst out laughing. He patted me on the back and continued laughing. Damn it, sorry, he said. I swear I'm working on not swearing, but I think we've lost our third again. We change third members like Spinal Tap changes their drummers. Damn. Don't pay any attention to them, Mason, said Prudence. They just don't understand true love and the sacrifices we make for it. Even as she said this, her hand reached out and found Jason's. It reminded me so much of Pity, who always held my cold, dead hand when we were together. Of course we will help, she smiled. That's what families do. Who doesn't understand true love? Penance muttered. I had the most beautiful antique warhammer. It was true love until he broke it. Penance, I didn't break your hammer, I said. I just grabbed it and threw it. Did you break her hammer too? Jason asked. Now I understand there's something about you that I like, he said, but I started. How many hammers does she even need? I heard she has about 50 of them, Jason said. I need thousands. Penance grumbled. too quietly to be called into the conversation, but we all heard her. The flight to New Orleans was much more difficult than any of my previous flights. Perhaps this was due to the fact that I had never flown on small private jets, or maybe it was because the pilot clearly liked to multitask while flying. Several times, I caught him flying, chatting, and trying to sneak a peek at my legs at the same time. If it weren't for our urgency, I think I would have waited for the commercial flight. The next one we could catch was leaving O'Hare Airport at 9 o'clock in the morning. The flight time on a regular plane from Chicago to New Orleans is just under 2 hours, but this small plane did not have that speed. The pilot estimated that the flight would take about 2 hours and 40 minutes, so we would be in the air for about an hour longer. But considering that we would be in New Orleans before the commercial flight even left Chicago, our choice was clear. When we landed, we rented a car and used Google again to find a fortune teller. I knew she had 4 or 5 establishments. I call them that because some of them were full-fledged stores and others were just counters inside other businesses. We didn't know which one she would be in, so we chose the one that was closest to the airport and plotted a route there. The store looked exactly as you'd expect. A small building with a storefront on the street, surrounded by voodoo shops and small restaurants. The very nice older lady who worked there looked at us with interest as soon as we walked in. "We're not open yet, but I left the door open for you," she said. "We need to start," but she interrupted me. "You need to know your destiny, Sarah," she smiled. "It's $50, and it'll open the veil of the future for you. Tell you everything you need to know where you're going and what's going to happen when you get there." The sign outside says $30. Chris smiled, already reaching for the money. "These are just ordinary predictions," she smiled in response. "Yours is a very special prediction, so it's worth a little more." Chris, I think the fact that she knew our names made us curious. Even when Chris handed her the money, she winked at us. "When this is all over, you two should really come back, so I can tell you about your adorable daughter and what she'll do in the future," she said. She handed us a note and waved goodbye. She then continued walking around the store, watering the plants, and put the kettle on the stove. Chris just looked at me and shrugged. I opened the note and read it. She was clearly the woman we were looking for. The note said which of her stores she would be waiting for us at. She knew we would come and had begun cleaning the amulet last night so that it would be ready for our arrival. I turned to the elderly woman. She looked up, and before I could say anything, she added, "You're welcome. Good luck." I thought the note said we would get an amulet. I told her, "Sarah, you will receive the amulet." She smiled. "It's in the best interest of all of us if Bridget gains any power, or if the entity that controls her gets the opportunity to infiltrate our plane. It will be the end for all of us." I looked at her with confusion. "Sarah, you're gonna have to try harder," she said. "You're missing pieces of the puzzle all over the place. It's your gift. You know, in your own way, you're as powerful as anyone else, but your abilities come in a different form." "My what?" I asked, smiling, thinking she was crazy. "Sarah, how can you not believe after everything you've seen?" she asked. "I believe in her abilities," Chris said. "Of course you do," she said. "Sorry, Chris, it's called love. If Sarah told you she could fly, you'd probably jump off the top of the building." "Sarah, why do you think you don't have powers?" she asked. "Well, first of all, I can't do any of the things that my aunt can do. I can't do the things that I saw Rebecca do," I said. "Even Savannah and Evie have more abilities than me, and they can't do much at all. Your cousin Savannah has the ability to control or alter probabilities," she said. "She can't control it. If you look at her life, she rarely has big failures. Even the one traumatic experience she went through ultimately led her to happiness. Evie controls the moods of the people around her. Unfortunately, she usually limits herself to things that piss everyone off," she continued. "But you, Sarah, are like me. We are clairvoyants. We can't even lift a match with our powers. It makes you think that you don't have them, but we can see everything. We see patterns and trends. We see actions as pieces of a puzzle, and if properly developed, we can see the future. This makes all these bright abilities not so necessary." I looked at her, trying to at least show that I was open to her ideas. "What makes you think you're so good at your investigations?" "Your Aunt Angela has been trying to explain this to you for years," she said. "And who is my Aunt Angela?" I asked. "Your Aunt Angela can do everything. She's a sorceress. She's at the top of the chain. If she had more powers, she could be the most powerful witch on the planet. That would be good because she's incredibly kind. If Bridget wins, or if the entity that controls her is the end of all of us, especially everyone with even the slightest magical abilities." Bridget began to crave more and more power. She will not stop at 100 witches. First, she will want to return her lands and take revenge on those who executed her unfairly. But after she gets it, she will want more. She needs to be stopped. Rebecca is just a battery, nothing more. She doesn't know how to control herself. She always hid her abilities and hid from them. She doesn't want anything to do with it. And what's worse, she's weak. She's like a nuclear reactor with a bad cooling system. Sooner or later, she will explode. I have already foreseen several possible scenarios in which you will lose. Sarah, you're also wasting time. Your visit here to me is a waste of time, but not a fatal one. We wanted to talk, so I could make you start believing in yourself. What do you mean waste of time? I asked. Your allies could bring you a necklace, she said. They still had to go to Chicago for their fight, and they're the key to stopping Bridget. I can't tell you more, but I will tell you this. Angela will play a big role in this, as will Rebecca. But Angela's plan will fail, and you don't use it. She picked up the box with the amulet. Just as you think, what allies? I asked. Suddenly, a picture of an airport appeared in my mind. A pale, cinched man and two strange women in leather suits. Exactly, she said. Sarah, working with them will take you out of your comfort zone, as will your other allies. But they will all play their roles, and without them, you can't win. It seems like you have enough of my money now, she smiled. Tell my pilot your ride back to Chicago is free. On the way to the airport, I squeezed my husband's hand so tightly that he probably thought I was trying to break it, but I was lost in my thoughts. I had to find the flaw in Angela's plan, or we would all die. I also needed to understand what the gypsy meant when she said Rebecca was weak. She compared it to a nuclear reactor. I guess that meant it could explode and kill us all, or cause us to die. I also needed to figure out how queer people were involved in all of this. The gypsy said that we have other allies. Less than an hour later, we were back at the airport and flying home, with the pilot swearing under his breath the entire flight. He was ready to demand we pay for the return flight until I explained to him that the gypsy was allowing us to fly for free. He spent most of the flight complaining that the Yankees were depriving his children of food. I think that the very second the plane touched down, Chris jumped to his feet and pulled me along the narrow passage of the plane toward the exit. I was proud of his determination and willingness to throw himself into danger for the greater good. I was even more glad that he was there because he gave me strength. These thoughts swirled around in my head until I noticed him dragging me toward the parking lot and his beloved Mustang. As soon as we got to the car, he walked around it to make sure it hadn't been scratched in 8 hours what had been gone. When we got into the car, he shocked me even more by calling home to check on Charera. Give her the phone, he told my assistant, who probably thought Chris was crazy. Chris, dear, she is only 6 months old. Not only will she not understand what is happening, but she will never remember it, I said. He just shrugged and started the car. He squeezed my hand, and we headed back to our house. For the most part, the road was calm, but there was one incident that made my brain work on all cylinders. We were driving on the freeway, and, as usual, when Chris thought we weren't going to get caught, he was speeding. We were traveling at about 110 miles per hour. I was lost in my thoughts, trying to make sense of everything, and Chris was focused on driving. Suddenly, I felt him tense next to me. What happened, dear? I asked. Nothing, he answered kindly, but from the expression on his face, I realized that something was happening. I glanced at the speedometer. Chris was going 140 miles per hour. The supercharger whistle was clearly audible, and the Shelby engine roared at full power. I knew the car could do another 40 miles per hour. I looked in the rearview mirror to see what was going on and noticed a car coming toward us very quickly. We lost a little traction as we turned the corner, but I knew Chris could handle the car at 160 miles per hour. This doesn't make sense, Chris spat. What doesn't make sense, dear? I asked. The car behind us is a 2006 or 2008 Mustang GT, and this guy has no chance of catching us at this speed, he said. I looked in the mirror again and saw that the car had not only caught up with us, but was also about to overtake us. Chris changed gear and pressed the gas pedal to the floor. He squeezed everything he could out of the big, turbocharged V8. We pushed it to the limit, and the car accelerated to over 170 miles per hour. 500 horsepower, and who knows how much torque carried us forward. The exhaust system was so loud it hurt my ears, but the bright yellow Mustang flew past us as if we were standing still. The strangest thing about it was that the car was silent as the grave. We hit a few sharp turns, and it didn't matter. Chris, no matter how good a driver he was, had to change gears and even hit the brakes to cope with the turns. This yellow Mustang continued to move forward at an absurd speed. Alarm bells started ringing in my head again. Sarah, did you see this? Asked Chris. He must have been traveling at over 200 miles per hour and maintained that speed through the turns. When the road straightened out again, the car became a dot on the highway, getting smaller every second. I didn't say anything to Chris, but I was sure that we would see this car again. We returned to the lodge early in the day. The first thing I did was show the amulet to Angela. Zara, ingratulabek. Everything is falling apart. Rebecca wants to make a deal, and Evie agrees with her. I think Evie just misses the chance, and with Savannah, it's generally not clear what's happening, she said. As soon as everyone heard me come in, they came out of their rooms. Rebecca, do you love Joey? I asked. She nodded her head vigorously. That's why I want to make a deal, she said. Bridget can just give me Joey back and promise to leave us alone, and then she can take my power. I don't need it anyway, and I don't know how to use it. It's not that kind of party, honey, I said. If you give her your power, she can take over everything. Why would she honor any deal she made? So if you give her what she wants, you will die, I will die, and Joey will die. You should think about this. I have an amulet, so we can protect you from her, but we still need to find a way to defeat her. The amulet will only protect one person. She nodded her head. Evie, I said, call Chance, talk to him about trucks, curse him, call him a bunch of names, then tell him you love him and get your head back in the game. We need you. Cousin Evie ran to call Chance. They'll call Greg, Savannah said, smiling. Great job, said Aunt Angela. Maybe we can still win. A few hours later, when everyone had relaxed, she appeared. As soon as it got dark, an even darker darkness enveloped the house. The lights suddenly went out and flickered again. I didn't come to fight, she said, appearing out of nowhere. Her form was more solid, but still ghostly. She hovered over Rebecca and spoke to her. No matter what we say or do, it all comes down to you, she said. Tomorrow night at this time, you will either give me your body, or I will slowly roast your husband. Whether he lives or dies is up to you. I don't have time to sit here and argue with you tonight. My powers will bring me a second body into which I will move if I cannot take yours. Wait, Rebecca said. I have a counteroffer. I never wanted this. If you let Joey go and leave us all alone, it'll give you my power. You can use it with the body you receive tonight, and everyone will be happy. I looked at Rebecca like she was crazy. They'll consider your offer, Bridget said, and then she disappeared. Are you crazy? I asked Rebecca. From the very beginning, this witch wanted your power. Why do you just want to give it to her? What will she do with it? I bet it's not good. What will happen to us? What will happen to the rest if she gets what she wants? She'll have no reason to honor any deals. If you give her your power, she will kill you, Joey, and everyone else. Sarah, I don't know what to do, she said. I just want this to end. I want to go back to just being Joey's wife. I'm not a witch, and I don't want to be one. I just want my husband back and our quiet life. She was on the verge of tears. The last 2 nights have been terrible. I can't sleep without Joey. This is some kind of nightmare, she said. But Rebecca, with great power comes great responsibility, I said. Sarah, I saw the Spider-Man movie too, she chuckled. Do you know why my powers never developed? Because I've never tried to use them. I hid what I could do. If we're talking about movies, how about Carrie? I always saw myself as that weird girl who had no friends. I can imagine my whole school lining up and shouting, they're all going to laugh at you. It was my worst nightmare, she said. And then I met Joey. Sarah, he is my everything. He loves me for who I am. Sarah, do you know how lucky I am to have a man who thinks I'm cutie in my old robe and curlers in my hair? I want this back. So for me, giving up power I never wanted is not a sacrifice. In fact, my life will only be better without her. Without power, there is no responsibility. I promise I'll get you and Joey back from all of this, I said. You just need to have a little faith. Okay, I'll try, Sarah said. I just miss him so much. I went outside, where my husband was digging under the hood of his car. I knew that he was checking everything to understand why that car overtook us and flew ahead. I knew it hurt his pride. Getting past was bad enough. But the worst part was that we were passed by another Mustang, and it was a cheaper model. If a Ferrari or a Lamborghini had overtaken us, that would have been one thing. Those cars cost 10 or 20 times more than his. But when your Mustang's doors are ripped off by another Mustang, it's like a blow to your dignity. Next time I see that car, they'll be ready, Chris said. At this moment, I completely blacked out. Everything came together in my head. I saw all of Bridget's plans, and everything became clear. I knew exactly what needed to be done to defeat her. There was only one piece left that I was missing, and I knew where to find it. I kissed Chris like the world was going to end. What is this for? He laughed. Honey, you just saved us all, I said. I ran into the house to find Aunt Angela and Rebecca. Annie, I need to know where Bridget is keeping Joey, I said. I don't know that, she replied. But if you go back to when you connected to her mind while she was trying to get into Rebecca's head, you can find out. Sarah, I don't have that kind of power, she said. But if you use Rebecca as a source of energy again, you can, I said. He'll try if she agrees, Aunt Angela said. I would do anything to get my Joey back, Rebecca said. A few minutes later, the 3 of us were sitting at the table. Angela took Rebecca's hand and closed her eyes. I grabbed both of their hands and hoped that I could see it too. To my surprise, I was able to. I didn't understand how Aunt Angela could handle this. Bridget's thoughts were so angry and full of hatred. Joey was kept in a cave about 80 miles away, 20 miles past the place in the city where Bridget planned to steal another body. The new body was a nun. Bridget was going to betray her allies. She had a man named Papa Chelo who wanted the nun dead. There was also something she called the Voice. The Voice wanted the nun's body to hand over to him. Bridget would have to betray Papa Chelo. Bridget wanted the Voice to have the nun's body because she learned that the Voice was very ancient and powerful. But once in a human body, the Voice, or whatever it is, would become vulnerable. Bridget could steal the Voice's power, and then Rebecca's power. After that, she could kill everyone who stood in her way. Why settle for petty revenge when you can have everything? When the connection ended, I looked at Rebecca. "So, is this the entity you want to make a deal with?" I asked. She shook her head. "Sarah, she's gonna kill us all," she said. "Only if we let her," I replied. "But how can we stop her?" Rebecca, make a sound. "The last time we faced her, we barely survived. She easily defeated us. Last time, we played by her rules and on her terms. This time will be different," I said. "She's not waiting for us, and we will have help. I'm going to attack her first. She expects us to sit here and wait for her to carry out her plans. We will attack her when she doesn't expect it. But it all depends on the two of you. Just tell me what to do, and we can do it." My aunt said, "Annie, I won't be here, but this is what will happen." I told them my plan and explained everything they had to do to make it work. Then I went outside with Chris to wait for our transport. As Gypsy told me, I saw everything unfolding before me, like a chess game played by two very experienced players. Chris and I had been standing in front of the house for less than 5 minutes when she appeared. The yellow Mustang, which had overtaken us on the road, drove up to the house. My Aunt Angela went outside. "Sarah, is she here?" she asked. She fell silent when she saw the car. "Sarah, what's going on?" she asked. But even before she finished speaking, the car door opened and a girl of about 6 stepped out. "I'm hungry," she said, "and I need to go to the toilet." "Oh my God," Angela exclaimed. "Sarah, this girl is almost as strong as Rebecca, and there's even more power here. But there's dark power all around. Oh God, it's a machine. Annie, take her inside. Try calling her parents." "Chris and I are leaving," I said. The girl looked up at me. "She's not a machine," she said. "She has a name. Her name is Chrissy. She protects us, but mostly me." Angela took the girl by the hand and led her into the house. Chris and I got into the car, and the doors slammed shut as if the car knew where we needed to go. The car took off at an alarming speed. The speedometer needle only reached 140 miles per hour, but we were going much faster, probably over 220 miles per hour. Chris wasn't actually driving the car, we just held on. Once we got a little used to the speed, it became easier to judge by the bridges passing over the road. We covered a mile in about 15 seconds. It took us just under 15 minutes to reach the location where our new allies would meet Bridget's forces. I got out of the car and kissed Chris goodbye, hoping it wouldn't be the last time. The car, which the girl named Chrissy, sped away. The engine sounded great, but after reaching a certain speed, it suddenly became strangely quiet. At first, it seemed to me that I was in the wrong place, but then I heard howls and sounds of battle. I realized that not only was I in the right place, but perhaps I was also late. I saw many people and creatures that looked half human, half dog. There were many of them, and they were all advancing on 2 men and 3 women. One of the men and 2 of the women were the ones I saw at the airport. I was in an alley. Luckily, there were many restaurants in the area. I hid behind one of the large dumpsters and quickly realized that I would be better off inside it. Inside, I could be protected from all sides, and the smell of garbage would prevent these creatures from smelling me. It was a serious battle, and she was very fast and bloodthirsty. I wasn't sure Chris would have survived it if he had been here, and I certainly wouldn't have survived it. Jason suckers, we turned out to be suckers. We assumed the vampire would tell the truth. After all, he promised repentance and patience, a fair fight. They say he will fight them one-on-one. I was sure that he knew about Mason, and if this was all about the vampire we destroyed 2 years ago, he knew that I would be here too. But instead of the promised battle, 5 or 6 vampires and 20 or more werewolves were waiting for us. What was even stranger, on the roof of the building, from where the best view opened, shimmered the figure of a woman who looked as if she was woven from fog. I think this woman scared me more than all the creatures on Earth. But we also had a few surprises. Silver. Another creature howled, and the battle began. I lost sight of my allies. While fighting with all my might, I helped them whenever I could, but the fight required my full attention. I kept my eye on Patience, as I'm sure she kept her eye on me. We did pretty well. We each had our own strengths, and we used them. Patience found the high ground and sent silver arrows of death in all directions. Repentance was a real tank. She crushed everything in her path. Mason was incredibly fast when fighting vampires alone, and my patience, as always, fought like a Valkyrie. I was always fascinated watching her. Her speed and grace made the rest of us look awkward. Suddenly, she fell, holding her head. I immediately found myself next to her, cutting through everything that stood between us. There was not a drop of pity left in me. When Patience was in trouble, the woman I loved was rising from the ground, though I swear no one touched her. This was something different. And then he appeared. He was furious, screaming, "It's my right to kill her," he yelled. "Killing everyone is my right. You only had to weaken them." The mysterious woman appeared next to him. "You can take everyone else," she said, "but this one is already intended for someone else. Maybe you'll get a man." "We had a deal," Papa Kulu yelled. "Now we have a different deal," said the woman from the fog. The vampire bared his claws and fangs, but before he could do anything, he was thrown back and upward. He collapsed limply to the ground. Sarah, everyone watched the battle between the ghostly witch and the powerful vampire. Most werewolves and other vampires were torn about whether to help the devoted Papa Chulo or join the powerful sorceress. Some just left. A man with a sword approached the fallen woman in red leather. He looked really worried as she kept her hands on her ears, as if trying not to hear something. It reminded me of the witch's voice, but it couldn't be her. Bridget was checking to make sure her former ally was dead. I knew what I had to do. I wondered what would happen to my plan. I approached the woman. She rose from the ground in obvious agony. As I got closer, I noticed two things. The first was a barely visible, bestial entity hovering above her. I wasn't sure if anyone else had seen it. The second was a man with skin similar to hers. You could see from his face how worried he was. "I think I can help her," I said. He looked at me with a mixture of despair and disbelief. "Okay," he answered briefly. Though he didn't say the words, his message was clear. If I hurt her, he would kill me. I slowly took out the amulet that was supposed to protect Rebecca from Bridget and placed it around the woman's neck. There was a sound like a small explosion, and green smoke appeared around the woman. Then a very loud scream was heard. It was so loud that everyone in the area turned to look at us. It wasn't a woman's voice. The woman stood up abruptly, as if she had never been hurt. The amulet on her neck glowed with some kind of power. "Prudence, are you okay?" asked the man next to me. She smiled and extended her hand to him. "I'm fine because of this," she said, pointing to the amulet. "Jason, this thing was in my head. She wanted me destroyed." The voice screamed. "Well, that saves me the trouble of killing you later myself," Bridget said. "Wait, you have to help me," a voice shouted. "If you bring the witch's body here quickly enough, I can still possess it," the voice continued. "Why should I do this?" Bridget asked. "Because we are allies," the voice screeched. "Every union ends sooner or later," Bridget said calmly. "Our union is complete, but don't worry, I will avenge you." She looked back and smiled as she heard his screams, as his essence was absorbed into the amulet. Then she turned to me. "Well then, little witch," she smiled. Her ghostly form was so distinct that it seemed almost tangible. "I'm not sure whether to thank you for ridding me of this braggart or kill you, because I'm sure that you and I will not be friends. It's funny, of all the witches I haven't conquered yet, you're the least powerful, but somehow I feel like you're the one who's going to give me the most trouble." She looked back again and saw that the vampire was beginning to come to his senses. "Perhaps you came here to see how powerful I am, to understand what you need to do. Don't worry, I'll tell you what to do. You must surrender and agree to serve me." Then she fell silent when she noticed I was laughing. "You spent a lot of energy on this battle today," I said. "You are weak. It costs you a lot of effort to influence events in this world, doesn't it? That's why you need a human body." "I'm not so weak that I won't kill one almost powerless witch who can barely be called that," she said contemptuously. "You would be foolish if you decided to fight me." "I'm not the one you should be afraid of," Rebecca said as she stepped out of my SUV. "Evie brought them here after me." Rebecca looked at me as if seeking confirmation. I shrugged. "You're not strong enough to resist me either," Bridget said scornfully. "And if you don't retreat, your husband will be burned alive. The only thing that keeps him in this world is my goodwill. Dare to go against me, and he will die in agony. Your attachment to this man makes you weak." Rebecca made a sound. She looked at me again for support, but I couldn't promise her anything. All I could do was hope Chris would do his part. As Rebecca walked closer to Bridget's ephemeral form, the only thought in my head was that she would lose her mind. She wasn't here. She was divided between worrying about her husband and the fact that she didn't really know how to use her power. The fallen vampire quickly came to his senses. His body began to rapidly heal, and he stood up, rushing at Prudence without thinking. The Cajun did the same. At the same moment, the vampires collided with each other, with a deafening sound like in a stadium during a professional football match. Then many events happened simultaneously. Out of nowhere, the same yellow Mustang arrived at the scene at incredible speed. The door opened, and Chris came out, looking around for me. Joey followed him, rubbing his wrists, but he seemed okay. Then a small woman wearing torn leather clothes stepped out of the car. She looked around and shouted, "Mason!" The vampire looked away for just a split second, but that was enough. Papa Chulo noticed that his opponent was distracted. A Cajun vampire died, looking at the woman he apparently loved. The small woman in a leather jacket rushed across the field to the vampire's body. Everyone was stunned when the woman, sobbing, bent over the vampire's body, which was gradually turning into dust. Papa Chulo laughed. "One ready, two lungs left," he chuckled. "I'll leave you alive for a short time, so that I can kill you slowly over many years. Sometimes I just need something to do." The woman on the ground looked at the vampire and went crazy. She stood up and jumped at him with incredible speed for a human. A huge woman in a green leather jacket, holding what looked like a spear with a metal tip full of jagged edges, shouted, "Pete, no!" The woman moved quickly, but the vampire was faster. She fell onto the dusty remains of her former lover. Everyone around them froze, realizing what had just happened. Then came Bridget's shrill laughter. "Chulo, I changed my mind," she giggled. "This old body has died. He doesn't need it anymore, and soon I'll have this little witch. I'll kill her boyfriend, and you can take all the nuns. I don't need your mercy." Chulo said contemptuously, "We're not allies anymore. Remember? Now I do what I want. You should stay by my side," Bridget hissed. She raised her hand, and small lights flashed around Chulo. The vampire's eyes widened. "Who cares?" he grumbled. He pointed at Joey, and several werewolves rushed toward him. "Patience, repentance, protect this little man," Prudence shouted. "Jason will take care of the vampire." She turned to me. "You're a witch. Can you deal with this ghost?" "We'll try," I replied. I walked across the field to Rebecca, who just watched as the two women tried to protect Joey. I turned around to look at the battle. More and more vampires and werewolves emerged from the forest. Our forces were pitiful compared to their numbers. There was a screech of tires as the yellow Mustang passed Papa Chulo. The vampire jumped into the air, and the car rushed underneath him. "Do you think I'm an idiot?" he laughed. "This is the same way you killed my boyfriend. You did it to save that," he pointed at Prudence. "You took my firstborn from me, and for the sake of revenge, I will kill this creature right before your eyes. Then I will leave you alive, so you will remember her death all your life." He laughed again. Behind him, the car started up again. The tires squealed, and rubber flew out from under them, hitting Papa Chulo. But he just grinned. Suddenly, flames burst out from the exhaust pipes of the car, engulfing the vampire. He shouted for Bridget to help, but she was busy. 400 years later, a vampire named Papa Chulo died. When I turned to Rebecca, I noticed that Jason and Prudence wasted no time rushing to the aid of the two women who were trying to save Joey. As I got closer, I heard Bridget's voice. "Surrender, Rebecca, and your husband will live. You saw that stupid nun sacrifice herself to avenge some vampire. Don't you love your husband just as much? If you give in, you won't truly die. You'll just become a part of me, and this part will make sure I never hurt Joey." "You're tired, Rebecca," she continued. "It's a battle you can't win. You're not even a real witch. You were born with a power that should have gone to someone else. Can't you just take my power and leave me alone?" Rebecca asked. "I'll still need a body," Bridget replied. "And it must be one that can accommodate all this power." Bridget's ghostly figure began making gestures in the air, and suddenly my Aunt Angela emerged from the shadows with my cousins behind her. She began repeating the same gestures to block what Bridget was doing. "Very good," Bridget giggled. "It's a pity that you were too weak. This could have been a good fight, but I have the strength of almost 100 witches. Almost hundreds of weak witches." I said, "Annie, use Rebecca like you used to." The situation has changed dramatically. My aunt grabbed Rebecca's hand, using it as a source of energy. It was obvious that Bridget had more power, but then that little girl who was sitting in the car grabbed my aunt's other hand. Bridget's face immediately became wrinkled as she looked over her shoulder. My aunt had more power now, although not by much, and it seemed that Bridget was already looking for a way to escape. "Auntie, you must destroy her," I screamed. "If you don't, she'll just burn more witches and come back, even stronger." At that moment, my cousins, Evie and Savannah, also joined the battle, strengthening my aunt. Evie grabbed Rebecca's other hand, and Savannah took the girl's hand, forming a chain of 5 witches. All the power concentrated through my aunt. Her eyes glowed bright green, and her red hair seemed to be on fire. "Sarah, what should I do with her?" Angela screamed. "I can hold her, but not for long." "Prudence," I shouted. She saw me and ran towards me, her husband covering her back. I took the amulet from her neck and nodded in gratitude. The amulet still glowed with the power of the demonic essence contained within it. "Aunt!" I screamed over Bridget's screams. I didn't know how Angela technically did it, but the amulet could only contain one essence at a time. Somehow, Aunt Angela bound Bridget's spirit to the amulet and sent it back to the dimension where the demon lived. For a moment, everyone felt relieved. The spirits of Bridget and her demonic ally had been banished from our world. But then we realized how many vampires and werewolves were still around. Jason pointed to the black Mustang that had appeared at the top of the hill. A tall man in black leather with long black hair stepped out, looked around the battlefield, and pulled out what looked like an antique tomahawk. He began circling the tomahawk in the air and met Jason's gaze, who nodded at him. "Patience, repentance, get in the car," Jason shouted. The yellow Mustang started up again. Its door opened, and the car headed toward us. It slowed down as it passed two nuns who quickly jumped inside. In response to the rotation of the tomahawk, an icy wind rushed toward the battlefield. "The winds of November came earlier this year," Jason muttered. It was strange that a storm from the Great Lakes would travel so far inland, but these were unusual times. The winds turned into a storm that swept away all the vampires and werewolves standing on the hillside. Many of them died, their bodies crashing into tree trunks at the edge of the forest with all their force. Others were struck by stray lightning strikes that set them on fire. Some tried to escape, but most died. Once the area was clear, the man lowered his tomahawk and nodded to Jason, who waved him back. The man then got into the Mustang and drove off. The entire time he was on the battlefield, which took no more than 5 minutes, he didn't utter a single word. Just when we thought it was all over, when everyone was so exhausted both physically and emotionally that they couldn't move an arm or a leg, another car appeared at the top of the hill. It was an old muscle car, a Chevelle SS. A man got out of the car with a very worried expression on his face. He looked like he could be attractive if his face weren't crisscrossed with worry lines. When he saw us, he sighed with relief and headed toward us. He looked back at the car and shouted something. A pretty woman looked out of the car and ran down the hill toward him. "Well, who will explain all this to ordinary people?" I asked. I looked around and no one, not even my husband, volunteered. "Honey, I think you're the only one who knows what happened here," Chris said. We watched as the man and woman approached us, smiling carefully as they walked around the werewolf corpses. They walked past and headed straight toward where my Aunt Angela stood with my cousins, Rebecca, and the little girl. They were all exhausted from what had just happened. As the man approached them, the yellow Mustang started up and slowly drove toward them. The girl looked at the man and smiled faintly, although she could barely keep her eyes open. "Hi, Dad," she said, climbing in his arms. "We saved the world." "The whole world?" he asked. Her answer was the sound of her snoring. The man turned to his wife and shrugged. "She saved the world," he said. He then turned to the car. "You know, garage door repairs aren't cheap." The machine roared, as if growling with displeasure in response to his reproach. The car door opened, and the man carefully laid the girl in the back seat. He was about to get into the car when his wife stopped him. "Oh no, cowboy," she said. "I'll go for Chrissy. I'm tired. We drove all night. You'll take my Chevelle? You brought it here, so come back with it." He nodded, and she kissed him before getting into the car. "Hey, wait a minute," I called. I walked up to them, followed by my Aunt Angela. "My name is Sarah. We're gonna get together and discuss what happened. Don't you want to know what happened to your daughter?" "Hello," the man said. "I'm Tim Matthews. I'm sure my daughter Krista will tell me everything when she wakes up." He smiled at me. "Tim, doesn't all this scare you?" I asked. "There are dead werewolves and vampires everywhere. Your daughter was at the center of it all. She's going to become a very powerful witch. Why don't you and your wife go crazy with horror? I would definitely do the same if I were you." "Sarah, you're talking to a man who drives a Mustang that's haunted by the spirit of his long-dead first love," he replied. "My car, Chrissy, does anything it needs to do to protect us. My daughter Krista was, let's say, conceived in this machine. He and Chrissy have been in touch ever since. Since she was born, Krista often went to the garage and fell asleep in the car. What was strange was that Chrissy suddenly took off in the middle of the night, but we decided it was because Chrissy was protecting her." He walked up the hill to the Chevelle, and his wife drove off in the yellow Mustang. Evie and Savannah opened the trunk of my SUV. Evie took the blanket and stretched out in the trunk, closing the lid. Savannah sat in the second row of seats, her feet up, but she seemed lost in thought. Chris gave her another blanket. Angela and Rebecca followed me to Prudence, Jason, and 2 other women in leather who were standing near the body. All 4 were on the verge of tears. "I'm sorry for your loss," I said. "Sarah, you're a witch," said Prudence. "Can you?" I shook my head. "I'm a private detective," I answered. "I'm new to witchcraft. My abilities are more related to clairvoyance. The real witches here are my Aunt Angela and Rebecca." "I'm so sorry," Angela said, "but there are 2 things that are against us. The first is that too much time has passed. If we had arrived earlier, perhaps something could have been done. But given the current circumstances, I doubt I could have helped even then. She wasn't killed. She gave her life herself. She wanted to die. She didn't see any point in living anymore." "Another loss," the large woman in green leather said bitterly. She turned away, and Jason walked toward her. "Why are you touching me?" she screamed. "Not enough, Prudence. For you, you've already managed to make her a child. God, how much night do you need?" Jason removed his hands as if touching a snake. A few hours later, as the sun rose, we all gathered to discuss what had happened. After I told everyone about the main events, we split into 2 groups. Jason and Prudence returned to their house, taking the 2 women with them. I still couldn't believe they were nuns. All 4 of them were very quiet, mourning the death of Devotion and Mason. Savannah and Evie slept upstairs, waiting for Chris to take them to the airport. My Aunt Angela and Rebecca were sitting on the porch, talking. I saw Angela shaking her head, and Rebecca demanding something from her. Finally, it seemed that Rebecca had achieved her goal. I began to wonder if Rebecca had used her powers on my aunt. Of all of us, Angela came to her senses the fastest. She immediately called Uncle Mike as soon as we got back and told him how much she missed and loved him. I felt the urge to tell Chris the same thing, so I went looking for him. I found him standing on the back deck of the house, looking out over the water. "This is beyond weird," he said. I just nodded and snuggled up to him. A few minutes later, Rebecca came out onto the veranda with a beaming smile on her face. I couldn't figure out what exactly had changed, but something about her was different. She looked happy. She was looking for Joey, who at that moment was throwing stones into the lake. "What did you do?" I asked her. She just smiled at me. "I got rid of something I never wanted and never asked for," she said with a smile. I looked at her in confusion. "Sarah, thank you for all your help," she continued. "I know it was all about maintaining my strength and all that, but I still have that final scene from Carrie in my mind. I never wanted to be a witch. Look at how much pain and suffering this has caused me and Joey. Thank you for explaining to him that this is not cheating." Even as she said this, her gaze was fixed on Joey, standing by the calm water. "Rebecca, what did you do?" I repeated my question. "Sarah, I would be a terrible witch. I'm just not interested in doing this. I know it sounds strange and simple, but my only goal in life is to be the wife of that idiot who throws stones." She paused, her smile fading slightly. "I convinced your aunt to take away all my power. Now she is its owner, and I'm just an ordinary housewife. I need to talk to my regular husband. Thank you again for everything you've done." I shook my head. It all seemed so empty. People and creatures died. I think they actually died to prevent a demon and a long-dead witch from taking over the world. But we also fought to keep Rebecca's strength in her body. And as soon as it was over, she simply gave that power, for which we fought so hard, into the hands of her aunt. After all, if anyone should have such power, then my aunt was truly the best candidate. But it all seemed like a waste. Joey, I still don't know what I'm doing here on Halloween, watching my soon-to-be ex-wife ignore men who approach her just to stare at her breasts. We've come a long way, and I love her more than I can say. We try to make things work, but it didn't seem to work. I think it's mostly me. Rebecca seemed to consider our relationship even more important than before. We spent even more time together, but it took a long time to kiss again. She tried her best, and I think she understood me. I also tried to make her understand that she really didn't cheat on me. It was as if she had been pilled with something. We even went to counseling to discuss this. Rebecca even agreed to take a lie detector test. The test showed that she really didn't remember cheating on me, and that she would never do it knowingly. She really loved me, and that made everything worse because I loved her too. I guess I was just confused about my feelings, because for the first few weeks after all of this, I literally felt sick at the thought of intimate with Rebecca. She did everything she could. She walked around the house practically without anything, showing off her magnificent breasts, and I could hardly restrain myself from running to the toilet. One night, after I had fallen asleep, she decided to take a different route. "Rebecca, you know I love you, right?" I asked. "And I love you, darling," she replied. "I love you more than anything in this world. If that's true, then why can't I do what all those other guys did? You liked it. You really loved it. Why don't you want to do this for me?" She looked at me as if I had hit her, then burst into tears and rolled to the side. Suddenly, her green eyes sparkled with anger. "Oh, I'm about to get hit by lightning," I said. "Are you going to burn me?" "Joey, I can't even light a match unless I do it with my hands. I gave up all of this because all I wanted was to be your wife. I don't like night. You're the only one who's ever put it in my mouth, and no one has ever tried to do this to me in another way. This is not about me. I'm not that kind of girl, so deal with it." I couldn't come to terms with it. I kept imagining what other men were doing to her. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her leaving to have a night with them and giving them what she was depriving me of. I didn't think I would ever do this, but I left her. She cried and called me a fool. Of course, I was unhappy. I loved her more than life, but I was sure I had done the right thing. I followed her for several days, hoping to catch her with someone. The only thing I caught was a cold. One day, I looked out the window and saw her sitting still, crying, leafing through an album with old photographs of us. I decided the only way to get through this was to move on. Several friends invited me to hang out, but even when I was drunk, I couldn't approach the other woman. Then I heard that a mutual friend had convinced Rebecca to come to the party. He said she would be looking for a new man to replace me. I had to see it with my own eyes. Maybe if she could move on, so could I. I watched her for about half an hour. It was depressing. Even though we were no longer together, in some ways I felt like we were still connected. I turned to leave the party and came face to face with her. "Joey, I need you to come home," she said. "Do I know you?" I asked. "I thought you knew," she replied sadly. "I thought you knew that I loved you more than anything in this world. I thought you knew that I would do anything for you. And I thought you knew that I would rather die than be without you. You win, Joey. I'll do whatever you want. You can do this with me as you wish. Just please come home." Her eyes filled with huge tears, which began to flow down her face, smearing her makeup. "Joey, if you want me to be a prostitute, I'll be one," she said, "but I can't take it anymore. You can do whatever you want with me." "Joey, I was wrong. I love you so much that I'm ready to give you anything you want, at any time." "No, Rebecca," I interrupted her. "I was the one who was wrong. I was selfish. I guess I just couldn't come to terms with what I was seeing. You kept telling me it wasn't you, but I didn't believe you. But I love you, Rebecca. I will get back to you in any way I can. Forcing you to do something you don't like is not love. It's just my ego. I can handle this." And then we found ourselves in each other's arms. We left the party and went home. And from then on, we lived happily ever after. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you. Go ahead and listen to the next story, because this one is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think about it. Click to the next one. Click to the next one.